Drink my blood, I'll grow it back, innocent girl told the starving alpha vampire. The wind howled through the cursed forest, carrying with it a chill that cut to the bone. Ancient trees twisted in the darkness, their branches like gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. Few dared enter this forest, for the villagers whispered tales of a castle perched on the cliff above, a castle ruled by the alpha vampire, a creature of both beauty and terror, whose hunger was as deep as the shadows themselves. Ilara, a young girl with bright, curious eyes, walked carefully along the forest path. She clutched a small satchel filled with herbs she had gathered for her sick brother. Her home was far beyond the forest, but sickness waited for no one. Her heart beat fast, not from fear alone, but from the thrill of defying the warnings she had heard since childhood. She had always been brave, some said stubborn, and she did not believe in curses, not fully. The forest grew darker, and the path became harder to follow. Alara stopped, sensing a strange presence. The air felt heavier, charged with something she could not name. A faint glow appeared in the distance, beyond the twisted trees. It was a light, warm, golden, and yet haunting. Curiosity pulled her forward. At the edge of the clearing, she saw the castle. It rose tall and imposing against the night sky, its spires cutting through the fog. Windows glimmered with a strange, silver light, as though the moon itself had come to rest upon them. The gates were open, welcoming yet menacing. Most people would have turned back, but Alara stepped forward, each footfall quiet on the moss-covered stones. Inside, the castle was a place of shadow and whispers. Grand halls stretched into darkness, lined with portraits of faces that seemed almost alive. Candles flickered, their flames casting shapes on the walls that danced like spirits. Every sound echoed, the drip of water, the soft rustle of her dress, and then a heartbeat. Not her own, but heavier, deeper, and more dangerous. From the shadows he appeared. Kale, the alpha vampire, tall and imposing, with eyes black as night and hair that fell like liquid darkness around his pale, sculpted face. His gaze fell upon her, sharp and assessing. He had been starving for days, weeks, perhaps longer, and the sight of her brought a hunger he had not felt in centuries. Alara did not move back. She met his gaze steadily, her heart pounding, but her fear tempered by something stronger, courage. I am not afraid of you, she said softly, her voice clear in the silence. Kale tilted his head, intrigued. Most humans would tremble, would beg for mercy, or collapse from fear. But this small girl stood before him with defiance, and in that moment he saw not prey, but something rare, a spark. "Do you know what I am?" he asked, his voice low and rough, echoing like distant thunder in the hall. "I know you are hungry," Alara replied, her eyes unwavering. "And I know I am not afraid to help you." Kale's frown deepened. "You would offer yourself." His tone was not cruel but curious, almost incredulous. "Yes," she said simply. "Drink my blood, I will grow it back. I can help you without fear." A long silence followed. Kale stared at her, feeling something stir in him he had not felt in centuries. Hunger, yes, but something else. Something unfamiliar, something that made the shadows inside him shift and tremble. "You do not understand what you ask," he murmured. "Most would not survive a single taste." "I will survive," Alara insisted. Her hand hovered over the strap of her satchel, not for a weapon but for comfort. "I am not afraid of what you are." Kale's black eyes softened just a fraction. He stepped closer, and the air between them grew electric. The hunger inside him roared, yet he did not strike. Instead, he observed her, the gentle curve of her lips, the fire in her gaze, the courage in her posture. She was fearless, yet not reckless. And he had not seen this in centuries. Finally, he spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "Very well, I will taste, but know this, I will not stop until my hunger is sated." Alara's heart raced, but she did not retreat. She held out her arm, pale and small in his enormous shadow. Kale leaned closer, his fangs gleaming faintly in the candlelight. And then he paused. He met her eyes and felt something he could not name: loneliness, regret. a sadness buried beneath centuries of hunger and cruelty. And for the first time in a long time he hesitated, not because of caution but because of her. Her calmness, her courage, her willingness to face him without fear. It was a mirror to a part of him he had long forgotten, a part that had once been human, a part that had once known love. Kale's fangs barely grazed her skin, and she flinched only slightly. Pain was sharp, yes, but not unbearable. And as he drew the tiniest drop of her blood, something extraordinary happened. Her blood was unlike anything he had tasted before. It was warm, vibrant, full of life and courage. Each heartbeat seemed to echo in him, calming the wild hunger, stirring memories of a life long past. Kale staggered slightly, his hand gripping her wrist not in force but in disbelief. You are different," he murmured. "I have never felt this." Alara smiled faintly, her hand resting gently against his. "Then you must learn," she said softly. "Learn that not all humans fear you, not all humans are prey." Kale could only stare, his heart, a heart he thought dead centuries ago, stirring in ways he did not understand. He let the drop of blood fall from his lips, as if savoring not just the taste but the courage behind it. "You are bold," he said finally, "bold beyond reason. And perhaps foolish. Maybe," she said, her eyes bright in the dim candlelight, "but sometimes courage can be stronger than fear, even yours." For the first time in centuries, Kale felt a strange sensation, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest, mingling with the hunger. He had tasted her blood, yes, but more than that. He had tasted her bravery, her defiance, her unwavering spirit. The castle, which had always felt cold and lifeless, seemed to respond. Shadows shifted, flickering across the walls as if approving this bold intrusion. And Kale knew, deep in the dark corners of his being, that nothing would ever be the same. Alara withdrew her arm, smiling faintly, and Kale stepped back, still gazing at her. The hunger was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but now it was tempered by curiosity, wonder, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "You have survived," Kale said slowly. "And yet I feel compelled to protect you, not harm you. Why? Because I can see you," Alara said softly. "Not the monster, not the hunger. I can see you, Kale, the man you used to be and the man you can be again." Kale looked away, the shadows in his eyes deepening. "A man I cannot be," he whispered. "Not anymore. The curse, the hunger, it is a part of me." "Then maybe it does not have to be," she said, stepping closer. "Maybe it can be something else, something better." He laughed softly, a sound that echoed through the empty halls like distant thunder. "Innocent girl," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "You do not know what you are asking. The darkness, it is not something to tame. It is something to fear." "I am not afraid," Alara said firmly. "And I am not alone. If you let me, I can help you. I can help you find a part of yourself you think is lost." Kale felt a shiver run through him. He had heard these words before from countless mortals who had tried to offer hope. All had failed. All had perished in fear or despair. Yet this girl, she was different. For the first time, Kale felt doubt, not in her but in himself. Doubt in the belief that he was beyond redemption. Doubt in the conviction that he was only a predator, a creature of hunger and darkness. And then, without another word, he did something he had not done in centuries. He knelt before her, not in submission but in acknowledgement. He lowered his head, letting the shadows of the castle swirl around him, and whispered, perhaps there is more to this world than hunger. Perhaps there is a reason I am still here." Alara reached out, placing her small hand over his. The warmth of her touch, the courage in her eyes, and the quiet strength of her words filled the space between them. For the first time in centuries, Kale felt human. The storm outside the castle began to settle, the wind softening, the trees stilling. The night seemed less threatening, as though the world itself had paused to watch this unlikely bond forming in the shadowed halls. And yet, a shadow lingered at the edge of the castle, unseen by either of them. Something ancient, patient, and hungry, watching, waiting. Kale's eyes flickered toward it, the darkness inside him stirring once more. But Alara, unaware of the danger, smiled up at him. "You see," she said softly, "not all humans fear the night, and not all creatures of the night are beyond saving." Kale looked down at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps you have given me something I thought lost forever." And in the quiet of that haunted castle, two unlikely souls found the first spark of trust, courage, and something far more dangerous than fear, something that could change both their destinies forever. The night stretched on, shadows dancing across the walls, and Kale knew one thing with certainty: he would never be the same. And as Alara closed her eyes, weary but unafraid, she whispered softly, more to herself than to him, "Drink my blood, I will grow it back." A promise, a challenge, and the first step toward a bond that could either save or destroy them both. The castle held its breath. Outside, the forest waited. And Kale, the alpha vampire, felt hunger in a new way. Hunger not only for survival, but for something he had long thought impossible: hope. The sun had not risen for centuries over the lands surrounding Kale's castle. Shadows clung to every corner, and the wind whispered secrets that no mortal had ever heard. Yet inside the castle, something different was happening. Something alive, fragile, and extraordinary. Alara had stayed the night, not out of fear, but because she could sense that Kale, the alpha vampire, needed her presence more than she needed her own rest. The castle that had always felt cold and lifeless now seemed to breathe around her, responding to her courage and her warmth. Kale moved silently beside her, a shadow among shadows, yet there was a difference in him. The hunger was still there, a dark and primal ache, but it was tempered by the blood she had offered him the night before. That small gift, taken without fear, had done more than fill his body. It had stirred his mind, his memories, and the long-buried pieces of the man he used to be. "You slept well?" he asked quietly, his voice low, almost a rumble, as they walked through the vast halls lined with ancient portraits. Each face in the paintings seemed to stare at them, as if judging, as if remembering things that time had tried to erase. "I did," Alara said, adjusting the satchel on her shoulder. "Better than I expected, actually. I was afraid at first, but I felt safe." Kale's eyes flicked toward her, a mixture of surprise and something he had not felt in centuries: warmth. "Safe," he repeated, almost echoing the word as though it were foreign. "You feel safe here, in this place of shadows and hunger?" "Yes," she said simply, "because you are here, and because you are more than what people say you are." Kale looked down at her, his expression unreadable. He had long believed that he was nothing more than a predator, a shadow that haunted the living. But her words, they cut through the armor of centuries, exposing a part of him that even he had tried to forget. For a long moment they walked in silence, the echoes of their steps filling the halls. Then Kale spoke, his voice low and careful. "You do not understand the curse I carry. I have lived through centuries of night, centuries of hunger, centuries of watching lives pass while I remain the same. You cannot imagine the weight of it." Alara stopped and looked up at him. "Then show me," she said softly. "Show me the curse. Show me what you are hiding. Maybe seeing it will make it easier to help you." Kale hesitated, then nodded. He led her through a series of corridors she had not noticed before, their walls carved with strange symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the candlelight. They reached a chamber at the heart of the castle, one that pulsed with ancient energy. "This is where it began," Kale said, his voice nearly a whisper. "Long ago, before the hunger took me completely, I was cursed by a sorceress queen. She bound my soul to the night, to darkness, to hunger that would never end. I became what I am now, neither fully alive nor truly dead, a shadow among men." Alara stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I do not see a monster," she said quietly. "I see someone who is trapped. Someone who needs help, not fear." Kale's expression softened, but the shadow in his eyes remained. "Help," he said, the word tasting strange on his tongue. Few have offered it in centuries. Most offer fear or hatred or death. You offer courage. And that is far more dangerous than any weapon. Alara reached out and touched his hand lightly. Her fingers were small against his large, pale ones, but the warmth of her touch seemed to seep into him, softening the edges of the darkness. Courage is stronger than fear, she said again, and maybe it can even tame the darkness inside you. Kale looked down at her, a faint shadow of a smile on his lips. He had not smiled in centuries. You are brave, little one, braver than anyone I have met in a long time. But bravery can only go so far. Even you cannot change a curse that has lasted hundreds of years. Then let me try, Alara said firmly. I am not afraid, and I will not leave you. For a moment, Kale said nothing. He studied her, the fire in her eyes, the courage in her stance, and he felt something stir within him. Hunger, yes, but also something unfamiliar, hope. A dangerous, fragile hope that he dared not name. Very well, he said finally. You will stay. But you must understand this is not a safe place. Shadows are everywhere, creatures lurk in the corners, and my hunger, it is still a part of me. I understand, Alara said calmly, and I am ready. Thus began their days together in the shadowed castle. Kale showed her the hidden chambers, the libraries filled with books older than kingdoms, the secret gardens where plants glowed faintly under the moonlight. He spoke to her of the world as it had been centuries ago, of battles fought and lost, of kings and queens who had fallen, and of the loneliness that had consumed him ever since. Alara listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. And in listening, she began to understand not just the curse, but the man beneath it. She saw the sorrow in his eyes, the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders, and the moments of humanity that still lingered, fragile and fleeting. And Kale, in turn, began to see her in ways he had not imagined. She was not just a mortal girl, not just someone to feed upon. She was a light in the darkness, a spark of courage that challenged his long-held beliefs about himself and the world. Each drop of her blood he tasted was no longer just sustenance. It was a reminder of life, of hope, and of connection. One evening, as the moon rose high over the castle, they sat together in the secret garden. The flowers glowed softly in the pale light, and the air was filled with the scent of herbs and night-blooming plants. Kale's hunger had grown faint, almost controllable, and he found himself speaking more freely than he had in centuries. You are remarkable, he said quietly. Most humans would have run screaming from this place, or they would have fought and died in fear. But you stand here willingly. You offer yourself without hesitation. Why? Alara looked at him, her eyes calm but filled with determination. Because I can see you, she said softly. Not the vampire, not the hunger. I can see the man you used to be and the man you can become. I believe in that part of you. Kale's chest tightened. He had not heard such words in centuries. Most had called him monster, shadow, beast. Few had seen the man beneath. And yet this small girl, so fragile and yet so strong, could see it. You are brave, he said again, almost to himself. Braver than anyone I have known. And yet there is danger here. The curse is not gone. Shadows will come. Creatures will test you, and I am not sure I can protect you from everything. I do not need to be protected from everything, Alara said. I only need to be protected from the things I cannot face alone, and I will stand by you, Kale. We will face it together. Kale studied her, and for the first time in centuries, he felt a spark of something he thought lost forever. Trust. Not just trust in her, but trust in himself. Trust that perhaps he could change, that perhaps the darkness inside him did not have to define him. Days passed, and with each passing moment, their bond grew stronger. Kale's hunger became more controlled, more tempered by the courage and vitality that Alara offered. And Alara, in turn, began to understand the depth of his loneliness, the centuries of sorrow and regret that weighed upon him. One night, as a storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the castle in brief flashes of silver, a shadow moved in the distance. Kale stiffened, his senses alert. Something was coming, something old, something patient, something dangerous. "Elara," he said quietly, his hand brushing against hers. "Stay close. The shadows are restless tonight." She nodded, her own courage unwavering. "I will stay with you," she said softly. The shadow approached and Kale's instincts flared. Hunger rose, but so did something else, a protective urge he had not felt in centuries. He stepped in front of her, his eyes narrowing, fangs glinting faintly in the lightning's glow. But before he could act, Elara stepped forward, her hand raised. "Wait," she said firmly. "Do not strike, I feel something. It is not here to harm us, not yet. Let me see." Kale studied her, unsure, but trusted her instinct. And as she stepped forward, the shadow revealed itself. A rival vampire, drawn by Kale's weakness, by the scent of his blood mingled with hers. The two creatures faced each other, tension crackling like fire in the air. Kale's hunger surged, his instincts screaming to strike, but Alara's presence calmed him. She had given him something more than courage, she had given him restraint. In that moment, Kale realized something profound. Her blood did more than sustain him. It reminded him of who he could be. And if he was to survive, if he was to protect her, he would need to rely not just on strength, but on trust, on connection, on the bond they had begun to forge. The rival vampire lunged, and Kale moved with lightning speed. But before the strike could land, Elara acted. She reached out, her blood spilling faintly onto the ground as she touched the rival with a courage and vitality that surprised even the predator. Something extraordinary happened. The rival faltered, its attack weakening, confused by the strength of her spirit. Kale seized the moment, and with a controlled motion, he forced the creature back into the shadows from which it came. Breathing heavily, Kale looked down at her, awe and admiration in his dark eyes. You are stronger than you know," he whispered. "Stronger than I could have imagined." Elara smiled faintly, brushing the rain from her hair. "Strength is not always in power," she said softly. "Sometimes it is in courage, sometimes it is in trust, and sometimes it is in the willingness to face the darkness even when it is stronger than you." Kale's heart, or what remained of it, stirred. He had felt hunger, fear, and despair for centuries, but never this, never hope, never courage, never connection. And yet here it was in the smallest and bravest of forms standing before him, unafraid and unwavering. As the storm passed and the first hints of moonlight broke through the clouds, Kale realized something he had long thought impossible. Perhaps he could be more than the curse. Perhaps he could be human again in ways that mattered. And Elara, she was not just a girl who had offered her blood. She was a guide, a light, and perhaps the only chance he had at redemption. But as he looked into her eyes, a new worry surfaced. The world beyond the castle was still dangerous. Shadows were still waiting, and the curse that had ruled him for centuries had not yet revealed all its power. Kale took her hand, his fingers brushing hers gently. "We have begun something," he said quietly. "Something that neither of us fully understands. And yet, I feel that it is worth facing every danger, every shadow, every curse, if it means keeping you by my side." Elara nodded, her own courage unwavering. "Then we will face it together," she said, "no matter what comes." And in that quiet moment, in the shadowed garden of the cursed castle, two souls bound by courage, blood, and the faintest spark of hope prepared to face the darkness that awaited them. A darkness that would test them in ways neither could imagine, and yet perhaps forge them into something stronger than either had ever known. The castle had fallen silent after the storm. The shadows still lingered in the corners, as if watching, waiting for the slightest sign of weakness. But inside, Kale and Elara moved with a quiet purpose. Their bond, forged in courage and trust, had grown stronger with every passing day. Elara had begun to learn the ways of the castle, its hidden passages, its secret gardens, and the quiet rooms where time seemed to pause. She had learned to walk in silence beside Kale, to anticipate his movements, and to feel the subtle rhythms of the castle that even he sometimes overlooked. Kale, in turn, had begun to change. The hunger that had ruled him for centuries was no longer his only master. He still felt the pull of darkness, the instinct to dominate and consume, but Alara's presence tempered it. Her courage, her vitality, and her unwavering trust had become a force he could not resist, and he found himself questioning the very nature of his existence. "Do you ever think about the world outside?" Alara asked one evening as they walked along the castle's outer wall, the wind whipping through her hair. The moon shone faintly over the forest, casting silver light on the cliffs below. Kale's eyes followed the horizon, dark and thoughtful. "I have thought of it," he admitted, "but the world is not kind to someone like me. Centuries have passed, and I have only known hunger, fear, and shadows. The living, they do not forgive easily. They do not forget easily." "But maybe they would," Alara said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Maybe if they saw you as you are now, not the monster you were, they could forgive. And maybe you could forgive yourself." Kale's chest tightened. Forgiveness was a word he had not spoken in hundreds of years. He had been consumed by guilt, regret, and the belief that he was beyond redemption. Yet here was this small, fearless girl, speaking as if redemption was not only possible but within reach. "You are bold," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Bold enough to believe in something that even I have stopped believing in. Do you know what that means?" Alara shook her head. "No, but I want to learn." "It means danger," Kale said softly. "It means hope, and it means that you have given me something I thought lost forever." Days passed, and with them came challenges. The castle was not abandoned entirely. Rival vampires and creatures drawn to Kale's presence tested them constantly. Each encounter was a lesson in trust and restraint. Alara's blood continued to sustain him, but more than that, her courage inspired him to act with control, to think beyond survival, and to consider the consequences of his actions. One night, as they rested in the secret garden, Kale spoke of his past. The words came slowly, as if each memory carried weight that threatened to crush him. "The curse was not merely hunger," he said quietly. "It was punishment. A sorceress queen sought to teach me arrogance and cruelty. She bound me to the night, to the shadows, to this endless hunger. I was forced to watch kingdoms rise and fall, friends perish, and time move without me. I became a creature feared by all, including myself." Alara listened in silence, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You were not born to be cursed," she said softly. "You were shaped by it, but you can still choose who you become. You are not defined by the curse, Kale. You are defined by your courage to face it." Kale's eyes met hers, dark and piercing, yet filled with something fragile trust. "And what if I fail?" he asked quietly. "What if the curse is stronger than my courage?" "Then we face it together," she said simply. "I will not leave you, Kale. You are not alone anymore." Her words echoed in the chamber of his heart, stirring something he had long believed dead. He had spent centuries alone, consumed by shadows and hunger, but now he felt the pull of connection, of hope, and of something he could not yet name. Their bond deepened in the days that followed. Alara's courage allowed Kale to see the world in ways he had forgotten. She laughed, she cried, she questioned, and she believed. And in believing, she reminded him of the man he once was, the man capable of compassion, love, and humanity. But their peace was fragile. One evening, while exploring the ruins of a village near the forest, they discovered signs of a threat older than either of them. Shadows moved unnaturally, whispers carried on the wind, and the air itself seemed to shiver. Kale's instincts flared, and he felt the hunger rise, but this time it was different. It was not for blood alone. It was for protection, for survival, for the bond he had formed with Alara. A figure emerged from the shadows, a rival vampire, drawn by Kale's presence and the strength of his connection with Alara. Its eyes glowed with hunger and malice, and it moved with a grace that betrayed centuries of predatory experience. Kale stepped in front of Alara, his body tense, ready to strike, but she placed a hand on his chest, steady and unwavering. "Wait," she said softly. "Do not act until you understand." Kale hesitated, feeling the strange pull of her courage. She was right. Rushing in without thought could mean disaster. And so he watched, controlled his hunger, and allowed her instinct to guide him. Alara stepped forward, her small hand raised. The rival vampire hesitated, confused by her presence, by the courage emanating from her very being. Kale seized the moment, moving with precision and control, forcing the creature back into the shadows from which it came. Breathing heavily, he turned to her, awe and admiration in his dark eyes. "You are stronger than you realize," he whispered. "Stronger than anyone I have met in centuries." Alara smiled faintly. "Strength is not only in power," she said. "It is in courage, in trust, in the willingness to face the darkness without running." Kale's chest tightened. He had lived for centuries, feeling only hunger, fear, and solitude. But now, in the presence of this small, fearless girl, he felt something he had not thought possible: hope. A hope that perhaps he could be more than the curse, more than the hunger, more than the shadows. And yet, he knew the road ahead would not be easy. The curse still lingered, and the world beyond the castle was filled with dangers that neither he nor Alara could yet see. Shadows would rise, creatures would test them, and the choice between survival and redemption would come at a cost. But for now, in the quiet of the forest ruins, they stood together, bound by trust, blood, and the faintest spark of hope. Kale realized that he was no longer alone, and that the darkness inside him could perhaps be guided, if not tamed, by the courage of another. As they returned to the castle, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a warning and a promise. The curse was not defeated. Shadows still waited, and the bond between Kale and Alara, fragile as it was, would be tested in ways neither could imagine. But Kale felt something stir within him, a determination he had not known in centuries. He would protect her, not just from the shadows outside, but from the darkness inside himself. He would face the curse, confront the hunger, and discover whether redemption was possible. Alara, unaware of the full weight of the dangers ahead, smiled as she walked beside him. She trusted him, and in that trust she gave him the courage to face the darkness. And Kale, for the first time in centuries, felt that perhaps he could change, not for the world, not for the curse, but for her. The castle stood silent behind them, the night waiting, patient and watchful. Shadows whispered, and the wind carried secrets. But inside, two souls bound by courage, trust, and the first stirrings of something deeper prepared for the trials to come. Kale looked at Alara, a faint smile touching his lips, and whispered softly, "Whatever comes, we face it together." Alara nodded, her eyes bright with courage. "Together," she repeated. And in that quiet moment, amidst shadows and whispers, they knew that the journey ahead would test them in ways neither could imagine. But it would also forge a bond stronger than hunger, stronger than fear, and stronger than the curse that had bound Kale for centuries. The night stretched on, the forest waited, and the castle watched. And Kale, the alpha vampire, felt hunger in a new way, not just for blood, but for something far rarer: redemption, courage, and the possibility of love. The night was quiet, too quiet. The castle, which had always seemed alive with shadows and whispers, now stood as if holding its breath. Kale and Alara walked through the halls, their footsteps echoing softly against the stone walls. Outside, the wind carried only the faintest whisper of the approaching dawn, a reminder that even the night must eventually give way to light. Alara had sensed it for some time, the presence of something ancient and powerful, watching from the distance. She had shared her unease with Kale, and though he had felt it too, he had not known its nature. Now, as the first hints of morning brushed the horizon with silver light, that presence revealed itself. A figure emerged from the ruins of the Sorceress Queen's fortress, the very place where Kale's curse had begun centuries ago. The air around it shimmered with power, and its eyes glowed with the cold certainty of judgment. This was no ordinary rival. It was the spirit of the sorceress queen herself, the one who had bound Kale to the night, the one who had cursed him for his arrogance and cruelty long ago. "You have defied me," the spirit said, her voice like 1,000 whispers carried on the wind. "You have lived in shadows for centuries, and yet you persist. And now you have found companionship, foolish mortal girl. And you, creature of the night, dare to defy your destiny." Kale stepped in front of Alara, his body tense, every muscle ready to defend her. Hunger still lingered within him, the primal need to strike and survive, but it was tempered by something far stronger, a determination to protect, to save, and to face the consequences of his choices. "Alara is not yours to harm," Kale said, his voice low and commanding. "I will face whatever you send, but she will not be touched. Not by you, not by anyone." The spirit laughed, a sound that seemed to echo through centuries, cold and sharp. "And what will you do, cursed one? You cannot defeat me. I am the origin of your suffering, the source of your hunger, the reason you walk among shadows and fear. Sacrifice the girl and I may release you. Refuse and perish in your own darkness." Alara stepped forward, her hand brushing against Kale's arm. "I will not run," she said softly but firmly. "I am not afraid. Whatever comes, we face it together." Kale's chest tightened. He had spent centuries alone, consumed by hunger and sorrow, believing he could never be free. Yet here was this girl, fearless, steadfast, and willing to stand beside him. And for the first time he realized that the choice before him was not merely survival, it was redemption. The spirit's eyes narrowed, sensing the bond between them. "You are both foolish," she said. "But there is power in foolishness, and perhaps there is a lesson here. The choice is yours. Sacrifice the girl to free yourself or defy me and risk everything." Kale's mind raced. The hunger within him surged, but it was no longer blind. It was tempered by the connection he had formed with Alara, the trust they had built, and the courage she had shown. He could feel her heartbeat against his, steady and strong, a rhythm that reminded him of life beyond the curse. "No," he said firmly, stepping closer to her. "I will not sacrifice her. Not now, not ever. If I am to be free, it will be by my own strength, not by the suffering of another." Alara's hand found his, and she squeezed it gently. "Then we face it together," she said. "We will find another way." The spirit's laughter turned to a low growl, the shadows around her twisting and writhing. "Very well," she said. "If you will not sacrifice, then you will face the consequences of defiance. Only one path remains. Either embrace the darkness fully, or rise above it through your own will." Kale felt the weight of the centuries pressing down upon him. Hunger, sorrow, and regret rose within him, each memory a chain that threatened to drag him back into shadows. Yet he felt something else, something fragile but persistent. Alara's courage, her unwavering trust, and the spark of hope she had ignited in him. He closed his eyes, centering himself, drawing strength from her presence. When he opened them, they burned with determination. "I will rise above it," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally faced his own darkness. "I will not be bound by the curse. I will choose who I am, not what I was made to be." The spirit's eyes glowed brighter, shadows swirling around her as if the world itself waited for the outcome. "Then prove it," she said. "Face the darkness within you or be consumed." Kale felt the hunger rise, the pull of centuries pressing against him. Shadows clawed at his mind, whispers of despair and rage tempting him to surrender. But he felt Alara's hand in his, her courage grounding him, her trust giving him strength. He took a deep breath, letting the memory of centuries of sorrow pass through him without consuming him. He let the hunger surge, then recede, acknowledging it but refusing to be ruled by it. He let the shadows of the castle press against him, then step aside, choosing light, courage, and the bond he had formed with Alara over fear and isolation. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch across time itself, he transformed. not into a predator but into something greater. The curse that had bound him for centuries began to dissolve, not entirely gone, but tempered by choice, courage, and redemption. The shadows around him shifted, the castle itself seeming to sigh in relief. The spirit of the sorceress queen recoiled, her expression unreadable. "It cannot be," she whispered. "A creature of darkness choosing light." Kale looked at her, his eyes no longer only black but glowing faintly with a mix of shadow and light. "I am no longer yours to command," he said firmly. "I am myself. I choose who I am, and I choose to protect life, not consume it." Alara stepped forward, standing beside him. "And I choose to stand with him," she said softly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The spirit's form shimmered, then slowly began to fade, leaving only a whisper on the wind. "Perhaps there is more to this world than darkness," she murmured. "Perhaps even the cursed can find redemption." The first rays of the sun broke over the horizon, casting silver light across the forest and the castle. The darkness receded, shadows retreating as if recognizing that their master had chosen a new path. Kale and Alara stood together, side by side, their hands intertwined, watching the dawn. For the first time in centuries, Kale felt something he had thought impossible: peace. The hunger that had ruled him was no longer his master. The curse that had bound him had not vanished entirely, but it had lost its power to control him. He was free, not because the world had changed, but because he had chosen to change himself. Alara looked up at him, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "You did it," she said softly. "You faced the darkness and chose the light." Kale smiled, a real smile, the kind that had not touched his face for centuries. "No," he said quietly, "we did it. You were the courage I needed to face myself. Without you, I would not have survived." Alara shook her head, laughing softly. "I only gave you a reason to see it. The courage was always inside you." They walked through the castle together, the halls now filled with a soft glow of dawn. The shadows were still there, but they seemed different, tamed, almost protective, as if acknowledging the transformation that had taken place. Outside, the forest stirred with life. Birds sang, leaves rustled, and the world began to awaken from centuries of silence and fear. Kale and Alara stepped onto the castle's highest balcony, looking over the lands below. The curse had not vanished entirely. The forest still held whispers, the shadows still lingered, but the fear that had ruled the land for centuries was fading. Kale turned to Alara, his eyes reflecting both shadow and light. "The world beyond this castle is still dangerous," he said. "Shadows remain and there will always be challenges, but we face them together, and that makes all the difference." Alara smiled, her hand finding his once more. "Then we face them together," she said firmly. The first full light of dawn bathed them in silver, gold, and a gentle warmth. Kale realized that the hunger within him had changed. It was no longer only for survival, not only for blood. It was for life, for courage, and for the bond he shared with Alara. And Alara, standing beside him, realized that the boy she had once known in stories, the alpha vampire, feared and cursed, was now more than a legend. He was real, capable of change, capable of love, and capable of choosing hope over despair. The castle, once a place of shadows and fear, now felt alive with possibility. The curse had been confronted, the darkness faced, and the bond between Kale and Alara had forged something stronger than fear, stronger than hunger, and stronger than centuries of isolation. As they stood together, watching the sun rise over the horizon, both knew that their journey was far from over. The world outside was vast, filled with dangers and unknowns. But for the first time they faced it not as predator and prey, not as cursed and mortal, but as two souls bound by courage, trust, and the possibility of redemption. Kale leaned slightly toward Alara, his voice low but steady. "Whatever comes, I will protect you. Not because I must, but because I choose to." Alara nodded, her heart filled with hope. "And I choose to be with you, not because I have to, but because I want to." The castle seemed to breathe around them, the shadows retreating in quiet acknowledgement. The night had passed. The curse had been confronted, and the dawn had arrived, carrying with it a promise that even the darkest of nights could be transformed by courage, trust, and the choice to embrace the light. Kale and Alara remained on the balcony, hands intertwined, watching the first day of a new era unfold. And in that quiet moment, they knew something that neither had ever known before, that redemption, love, and hope were not gifts, they were choices. Choices they had made together. The sun rose higher, casting a golden glow across the forest and the castle, and for the first time in centuries, Kale felt truly alive. And though the shadows still lingered at the edges of the world, he knew one thing for certain. As long as Alara was by his side, no darkness could ever consume him again.